Dark Flows the River by COSMATA LINDIE.
Rest up early tonight, boys,
Frankie said to the men sitting around the campfire.
2 more days and we'll be on site.
Frankie was short and muscular, with skin burnt deep brown and eyes permanently narrowed from squinting against the sun's bright glare. Though not the official leader, he was the boat's captain, and the men deferred to him most times.
Tomorrow we hitting Devil Whip Rapids, and most y'all know that place is murder to cross. Every year the river takes a blood sacrifice, but like it never satisfied. Tomorrow's gonna take everything you got in you to get through.
Joshua looked up from his plate. Tall and wiry, his light greenish-grey eyes were startling in his very dark face.
You telling me, partner? I made this trip a dozen times since I walking in this bush, and me heart always in me hand where we going through Devil Whip.
He got up and stepped away from the group to toss the contents of his plate into the nearby river. There was a light splash, and silver ripples appeared as small night-feeding fish swarmed for the remains. Bright flames from the fire highlighted the fatigue in young Charles's face, the only one who had never traveled on the river before.
It worse than the one we passed through today?
He asked. Years of experience in the gold bush had tempered the mettle of the other members of the mining crew into a stoic hardness, but the toll of the trip was showing clearly on the boyish features of the youngest member of the crew. Tony laughed, showing even white teeth. Firelight glinted redly on a heavy gold band around his thick wrist as he ran a hand through the shock of tight black curls on his head.
Today was joke compared to what tomorrow will be. Papi ain't got nothing on Devil Whip. We talking miles of the baddest river you can ever imagine.
The distant roar of the rapids they had traversed earlier provided a backdrop to his words.
Every inch trying to lick the boat over and slam we against the rocks. If the steering out or the propeller break, is done we done. It does take half a day, even with that 75 pushing the boat. Devil Whip gonna make you find Jesus, boy.
Ease up, Tony, scaring city boy,
Joshua said.
I ain't scaring you for kicks. It's best you know from now what to expect.
Tony said.
The bush ain't for babies.
You hear me complaining, Tony?
There was an edge to Charles's voice, and his gaze was cool.
Your spirit will fly out your body and come back many times before we through tomorrow.
The hint of a smile now lifting one corner of Tony's mouth indicated that he probably was finding Charles's discomfort amusing.
But don't worry, Charlie, baby. Frankie's the best captain on the river. Know it like the palm of your hand. He running it for years now.
You ever capsize, Frankie? Asked another man sitting farther back. The light from the fire glowing faintly on his bearded features within the surrounding darkness.
One time only,
Frankie said quietly.
about 10 years back. Rock clipped the propeller and the boat flipped. 3 men went down. Shucks. I remember the incident.
Tony said.
Didn't know you was the captain, Frankie. Took 2 weeks to recover them bodies. And they only found 2. Leyland bones still wedged down somewhere between Devil Whip rocks, along with enough others.
There was a moment of silence around the campfire. Rain had fallen earlier, and the mossy smell of damp earth and decaying leaves was heavy in the air. There was another scent too, sweet but very faint. Coming, no doubt, from an unidentified jungle flower blooming somewhere in the darkness. Charles pressed his fingertips to his temples, gently massaging a growing pounding there. The headache had started 2 days into the trip upriver. More than once, as they traversed mile upon mile of perilous river, hemmed in on both sides by unrelenting walls of jungle, Charles had found himself questioning the wisdom of his decision to come out here. City boy, they called him, and he felt every bit of it out here. But losing himself in the bush, for a while at least, had seemed a good idea at the time. He looked up to see Tony watching him closely from the other side of the fire. He looked away quickly, hoping Tony hadn't noticed anything. "Why are you here?" Tony said suddenly. It was the first time Charles had been asked the question outright, and it jolted him. It was as if Tony was reading his thoughts. He resented the probing. He dropped his eyes to the fire again. How should he answer? He decided on a simplified version of the truth.
Was having some issues at home. My dad and I wasn't seeing eye to eye, so I left.
Tony laughed again.
Two bulldog can't live in the same yard. It's two things that send folks in this bush, eh? Looking for quick money or running from something. I mind your business, Charles. God knows. Not for we got things to run from, yeah? But let me tell you this. The bush is either gonna make a man out to you by, or it gonna bring out the beast. I see enough men to a monster in this place.
Joshua leaned forward.
Talking about monsters. Any of you ever hear the story of my great-grandfather and the pan cop?
Too much times.
A man wearing a red knitted cap chuckled.
City boy ain't as yet. You got you an audience, Joshy. Let we hear your pan cup story again.
Joshua took the tin cup of steaming black coffee Frankie offered him and drew closer to the fire. The 6 men sat in a clearing on the riverbank. It was a regular camping spot for travelers going into the interior, judging from the man-made detritus strewn around the space. A tarpaulin was stretched over a framework of sturdy saplings, which provided shelter and support for their hammocks. Partly beached on a narrow sandbar just beyond the clearing was their outboard engine boat, loaded with gear and supplies for the trip to the mining site. Dominating everything was the jungle, dark and solid, cut through by the black flowing river. The distant roar of the rapids they had traversed that day and the one they would be traveling through the next day were constant reminders of how precariously balanced their lives were in this wild place.
What's a pan cup?
Said Charles. The man in the shadows leaned a bit more into the light.
You never heard of it before, city boy?
Charles shook his head.
Yeah, well, I guess it's not something y'all coastlanders would know about. It lives deep in the bush. Looks like a man, but tall, like them trees, with a head shaped like a funnel. Whatever it catch, it does throw in the funnel, to eat later. But I interrupt in the man's story. Fire away, Josh.
Says what happened. My great-grandfather, William, was a Balata bleeder. He traveled through all these places in his time. People been coming here long before us, Charles. Balata bleeders, pork knockers. Them men knew this place inside out. The interior always got living if you got the backbone to go there. Anyways, was right below Papi. That great-granddaddy went into the bush. Him and 2 partners. According to the story, There were many days walking deep in the jungle, bleeding the bulletwood trees for balata. This night, as they're sitting round the fire, same as we know, they suddenly hear a song, attack, attack, like branch hitting hard against branch, but coming fast through the trees towards them. In the bush, that could only be one thing. And before they could run and hide, it was there.
What was it?
What was it? It was a parent cock primals. What do you think? It was the big funnel head that was knocking against the tree branches as he walked. He grabbed great granddaddy and threw him in his funnel. Them other two men didn't wait long. They ran like hell and didn't stop until they get back to the river and found their boat, thinking it was all over with William by then.
Was it?
Charles asked as the other men laughed.
Nah.
Joshua stood up, yawned and stretched.
3 days down the river, to hear a shout from the bank. There was great-granddaddy in a real state. He had escaped by grabbing a tree branch as the pan cup knocked against it and eased himself out the funnel. He climbed down to the ground and ran, not knowing east from west. Until sheer luck, he came down the river ahead of the Spaniards. From what I understand, that was the last time any of them went back in the bush.
There was a period of meditative silence as Joshua finished his tale. Then Frankie spoke.
Well, now that we've had our bedtime story, it's time to turn in. Throw some more wood in the fire, Charles. It keeps the jaguars away.
Charles lay wide awake. Around him the other men snored in their hammocks. Between the fatigues of the day, the worry of surviving Devil Whip on the morrow, and vivid mental images of great-granddaddy's pan cup, there was no room for sleep. Other images crept into his mind too. That last big fight with his father that had almost come to physical blows between them. Him leaving the house with clenched fists and his brain on fire, thinking how badly he wanted to hurt this man who had given him life. Then going to the hospital the next day to see that same man, body swathed in bandages, a tube helping him to breathe. Feeling a horror rising like a strangling wave inside him, knowing that he couldn't remain there any longer. Going into the bush had become an escape. The moon had risen. He looked out at the still jungle. Its shadows deepened, and its textures were shown in high relief by the moonlight. His troubled eyes fell on the rushing river, globs of foam flowing on its silvered surface, and he felt a chill. He did not belong here. This place of escape was not his world. This was the world of the men who slept peacefully around him. Its dark strangeness was not hostile to them, as it was to him. The ache in his head had intensified, threatening to burst through his temples, and he wanted nothing more now than to be back in his own world, where the shadows at least had names, and he could see himself more clearly than he did here. The sound jolted him upright in his hammock. Singular and oddly hollow, it was coming from somewhere in the jungle. Charles strained eyes and ears at the wall of trees around them. Charles whipped his head around. The sound was loud, and it was moving. Tumbling out of his hammock, he frantically shook the nearest sleeper.
What's going on?
Frankie mumbled.
Listen, man, something's coming.
What the hell?
But Frankie froze as they both heard the sound approaching fast.
Jesus Christ!
Frankie jumped up and began shaking hammocks, yelling at everyone to wake up. A sudden rustling among the trees signaled that whatever was coming was very close now. The men raced out of the shelter in a panicked tumble. At the edge of the clearing, the trees parted as a monstrous figure emerged in the bright moonlight. Standing upright like a very tall man, with a funnel-like head that was almost level with the trees. Glowing eyes flamed red in a hideous face, and snarling lips bared white, pointed teeth as it rushed across the space towards them. Filled with an unspeakable horror, the crew rushed towards the boat and began heaving it off the sandbar. "We're not gonna make it!" someone shouted. But with a final desperate heave, the boat slid off the sand as the men frantically threw themselves on board. The creature was wading out after them when Joshua yelled,
"Tony's Bob there!"
Everyone turned to look, as did the monster. On the bank, Tony was running down the clearing towards them. The creature lunged out of the water and snatched him up. In one violent movement, it snapped his spine and tossed him into its funnel head.
"Start the fucking engine, Frankie. Get the hell out of here!"
Joshua shouted. Frankie was trying, but the engine was not cooperating. Weak splutters and cold coughs were all it offered. The creature was no longer wading in. It had disappeared from the clearing. The only sounds coming from the jungle were the soft hoot of an owl and the faint rustle of leaves in a night wind. "He got to be following we along the riverside," someone said in a panic-filled whisper. "Keep the boat in the middle and pray to God it can't swim." Although the ache in his temples was gone, Charles sat with his head buried in his hands. Surrounded by his 4 remaining companions, he felt isolated. The darkly rushing current was taking them downstream, back towards Papi Rapids. He saw some of the men grab paddles, striving to keep the boat midstream and preparing to traverse the treacherous waters under their own power, if Frankie did not get the engine started in time. Charles was not thinking about any of that. His mind was working more clearly now than it ever had, and a terrible conviction came to him as he sat there. The monster had not come out of the jungle. It had come from a place much darker and more treacherous than any jungle. He knew, too, that they were no safer midstream than they were ashore. The monster was not following them from the shadows of the riverbank. It was right there, in the boat, with them, waiting to emerge again, perhaps in another form, when the pressure got too much. He didn't want to think about Tony, or where he was right now. Tony's constant taunting had not warranted such retribution, any more than his father's domestic tyranny had. But it didn't have to continue either. Charles gritted his teeth. Acknowledgement was the first step towards ensuring that there would be no reoccurrence. What had happened would become part of the law of the bush, same as Joshua's great-grandfather's adventure. To be told around campfires, changing a little with each telling until no one could say for sure what had really occurred. For now, though, he had to play his part and help get them to a safe place. Charles picked up the last paddle and braced hard against the river's flow.